I hope you've got your dessert and your cup of coffee. We're about 5 minutes ahead, so if some of you were expecting the bus to leave at 1:05, it's going to leave now. I just want to again thank our board of directors, our sponsors, our partners, and our staff for what has been a relatively smooth running conference so far. It's going to get a little rough this afternoon when the Shark Tank happens, but right now, the Citizen of the Year Award is just one of our hallelujah moments. Our Citizen of the Year, Mack McCarter, may be the best example I know of the old familiar saying, think spiritually, act locally. I think you'll discover that he is also an inspiring counterexample in complete contradiction to the observation that the writer Aldous Huxley made. Huxley said, "Men do not learn much from the lessons of history, and that is the most important of all the lessons of history." We've asked our former CEO, who's been responsible for introducing me to Mack McCarter and who wisely insisted when I joined NCOC last January that I visit Shreveport, Louisiana just as soon as possible to witness the work of Community Renewal International firsthand. Before serving National Conference on Citizenship as our interim CEO for 2 years, Sally was also the interim director of Philanthropy for Active Civic Engagement, we call PACE, where she also helped lead the project that we co-sponsored with PACE called Civic Pathways Out of Poverty. Before that, she served for nearly a dozen years as the director of the CORE network, and she's been a volunteer locally, at the state level, nationally, and internationally. Trained and certified, practiced, and taught as a registered nurse, she's the perfect person to call when your democracy is ailing, and she now serves as an advisor to the Community Renewal International. Please welcome my good friend and predecessor, Sally Prouty.
It is a privilege for me to be in the room with you all today. It's a particular privilege to have no responsibility for this conference. Thank you to Sterling and to his fine staff for hosting us and making it a very special time. My opportunity is to introduce Mack McCarter, and as I thought about Mack, I thought it's a little bit like trying to grab a hold of the wind. Not an easy task. Mack is everywhere and is involved with lots of folks. I'll say first that the National Conference on Citizenship Citizen of the Year Award is established to honor a former chairman and benefactor whose name you've seen in your program, and it's Joseph A. Cantor. Joseph Cantor is now 95 years old. He's been married for 65 years. Next week, we'll be celebrating his birthday. NCOC didn't just happen. It's been here for a long time, but it has survived over the years because of people like Joseph Cantor and Terry Neumeyer. Terry, I believe, is in the room still today, who made sure that when times were tough and the organization was very small, that it survived over time, and we're now here today. So I'm going to ask Terry, if he's here, and Josh Rubin, who is executive director of the Cantor Foundation, if they would stand and if you might thank them. I'm not sure. So Terry Neumeyer has been on the board for many years, over 40, and he found a way to make sure that NCOC was financially viable for the long term, and for that we should be honoring him. Terry told me last night that Joseph Cantor will be watching a tape of this presentation, Mack McCarter, and with that in mind, I'd like for you all to join me in applauding Mr. Cantor and wishing him a happy 95th birthday. The award recognizes a person who has, for their extraordinary commitments, furthering the cause of civic engagement and democratic practice. Mack McCarter is such a person. Mack is a graduate of Byrd High School in Shreveport, Louisiana, and I've heard that over and over and over. It's a source of great pride for him. It's also a source of friends who have supported his work over the years, and some of them are here today. Mack is a minister. He is a graduate of Texas Christian University and also of has a master's from the Bright Divinity School. Mack was in the ministry in West Texas for 18 years, and at the end of that time, or during that time, he realized that he could not do in community what he wanted to do from the pulpit. So he left the ministry, came back to his hometown of Shreveport, Louisiana, and began a journey that was almost 30 years ago. He began a journey that is now Community Renewal International. Mack is the founder of Community Renewal and is its ongoing coordinator. You heard a mention of Community Renewal from Ann Snyder this morning. I'm going to read just a note from her, the last chapter of her forthcoming book. Be sure and watch for the book, and reference Ann again. You're going to hear a lot about community renewal from Mack shortly. You'll hear about the We Care team. You'll hear about Haven House leaders, block leaders, and also about friendship houses, which are constructed in 25 to 30 block areas of the city of Shreveport and are being constructed other places. So for purposes of this introduction, I'd like to fast forward from the time Mack left the ministry to today. In addition to investing nearly 30 years of his life, he has invested his time, energy, and financial resources in developing and testing a methodology designed to tap into the caring spirit that we all possess. His purpose is renewing relationships, and the purpose of CRI is renewing relationships with neighbors and rebuilding the fabric of community. I met Mack in 2010, and without seeming to even take a breath, Mack spent the next 20 minutes presenting a compelling picture of civic renewal. And I listened intently. At that time and over the years, two things have consistently come to my mind. Mack said, we are in the business of establishing communities where every child is safe and loved. And he also said, we are emailing people around the world, and we have no idea who is living and dying 3 houses down. A visit to Shreveport, my visit to Shreveport, confirmed all that Mack had told me in the 20 minutes and so much more. Today, there are over 54,000 members of the We Care team. There are over 1,500 Haven House block leaders. There are 10 friendship houses located in 5 neighborhoods. There are 5 replication sites underway, and you're going to see a short video about one of those sites shortly. There are 4 university partnerships, and those are designed for growing, caring campuses. Community renewal was started in Allendale, the most devastated, neediest portion of the city of Shreveport. In Anne's book, she talks about Allendale, and I wanted to share with you a bit of what she had to say. She says, and I quote, "Fast forward 2 decades. Major crime in Allendale is down 60%. The drug dealers are gone. Former gang leaders have converted into block coordinators, and neighbors stroll comfortably from one house to the next, borrowing sugar while their children play hopscotch. And the grandmothers tend their tomatoes in the Allendale Garden of Hope and Love." Does that sound like Anne's description? It's perfect. The neighborhood, and continued quote, "The neighborhood's self-image has gradually improved, and property values have appreciated." With that in mind, I'm going to ask that I'm going to share a video with you, which is of a replication site, relatively new, about 1.5 years, in Oklahoma. This video is produced by the Ovidas Foundation that funded the project. It's a county-wide project in Oklahoma.
Once you've been to Shreveport and you see the work that they've done and how the neighborhoods have changed, it changes your life forever. We knew that we wanted to replicate community renewal for our county.
We've got to be connected to each other because all of us want this better world, a safe and caring and connected world for our kids to grow up in. We all want that. But when we don't invest in those tight-knit relationships begin to crumble, and we cannot have that world that we all want. We can't build it on top of crumbling relationships. It can't be sustained. What we do at Community Renewal is help neighbors restore a sense of community through intentional relationships. Every human being has this God-given capacity to care for another human being. We're not always great at showing that. None of us are always the best at caring, but every one of us has this capacity to care for other people. And that's what we're trying to rally people in our community around.
As block leaders in our neighborhood, we have hosted a movie night where we projected a movie on our garage and had people come over for popcorn. We have done just a community breakfast. Personally, our family, we have coffee on Saturday mornings, and it's kind of an open invitation, so people will just shoot us a text and say like, hey, we're coming over, and they just come over and have coffee with us.
We have a ladies' pasta night once a month. It's usually not very big. There's usually just, 5 to 8 of us. To see women across generations, women with children, women without children, it really is phenomenal to build these relationships and see these connections being made and really know the heart of people. If you chat with your neighbors before you go into your house in the evenings, if you ever like to sit on your porch, if you take food to a grieving neighbor, if you help somebody mow the lawn, you're doing the thing. It's like Community Renewal took the best of me and used it for the best of the community.
With the Friendship House platform, what we do is we move a trained staff member into a struggling neighborhood, and they work to repair trust in that neighborhood. It's basically a person that lives in the community, connecting other neighbors together with intention.
So the big picture of Friendship House would be that we would intentionally move a family into a neighborhood, and that would be where their home was, and they would live and do life there. If we want to have better community, if we want to have better neighborhoods, then we've got to have good people. When we start with the kid clubs helping young people become the best them that they can be through intentional relationships, intentional caring, where we work through problems, work through issues, and help them to grow as young people. And our desire is that as they grow as young people, that they will grow into young adults, and then adults that will be caring, be loving, and be the kind of people that we know are going to help our world be better.
Love really does work. It has given me so much hope knowing there's so many incredible people in our community that want to make a difference, that want to change their world, and that we can actually unite together around a very simple idea of caring for each other. If there's one thing that community renewal represents, it's hope in our community. It's those small things that add up to big things when we all work together. Our community is full of hope because of the work of our people in community renewal. In Shreveport, where this began, they talk about we don't wake up and go to work, we wake up and go to life. And that's what it feels like. I love everything about what we do, the people that we come in contact with, the hope that this message brings, and I love the fact that we get to help facilitate that in our community. I absolutely love the work of community renewal.
So that's one example, and it should give you an idea, I think, of what we're talking about with community renewal. Of the 5 replication sites, 4 are in the U.S. One is in West Central Africa, in Cameroon, and there's so much to talk about. So the methodology of community renewal and how Mack got there, he will share with you. And we're definitely honoring Mack for all that he has personally accomplished with community renewal, all that his staff and volunteers have accomplished. Most of all, at this moment, we're honoring Mack because he's who he is. We're honoring Mack for his brilliance, for his visionary thinking, for his kind heart and gentle spirit, and it's the truth. His ability to stay the course, even in the toughest of times. It's important that you know that all that has been accomplished and is being accomplished with community renewal has been accomplished absent government funding. That's a really, really important point, and I don't want you to miss that. We're especially honoring Mack for his decision to marry his lovely wife, Judy. There you go. Thank you. Thank you. Judy also has stayed the course for these nearly 30 years, and not easily. And with a husband who's not getting a salary and working his head off and all these things. We have with us today, Judy is here. Please stand. Mack's son David, daughter-in-law Kelly, their 3 children, so Mack's grandchildren are here. Stand up. We're honoring the family. We're honoring dedication and commitment. We're also honoring some of those Byrd High School folks. One of them is John Dalton, former Secretary of the Navy, who's here with his lovely wife, Margaret. John chairs the Advisory Council for Community Renewal. And Bud McFarland and his wife, Johnny, who are here. Bud served as a national security advisor to President Clinton. President Reagan, I said that and I was corrected. Okay, President Reagan. And Steve Danzansky was on the National Security Council with President Reagan. We have an august group of individuals. I'd like to have all of you all who are associated with community renewal to please stand and be recognized. And I want you to know community renewal has a very small paid staff, and a very, very large contingent of hundreds of volunteers. Many are full-time. Stand up. Mack's work is spiritual, it's social, it's civic, and it's also political. Not partisan, but it is political. At NCOC, we believe that the roots of citizenship spring from the culture of compassion and caring that is represented by community renewal. I'm guessing that many of you know about NCOC's study of civic health and the Civic Health Index. If you do not, make sure you do before you leave this conference. Almost 1/3 of the civic health questions on the current population survey, the census, are directly represented and addressed by community renewal. I'm going to list them quickly. Talking to and spending time with family and friends, discussing various issues with family and friends, providing help to friends or to extended family, talking to and spending time with neighbors, discussing various issues with neighbors, doing favors for neighbors, and extremely important, talking to and spending time with people of different backgrounds. Mack McCarter, we honor you for your kindness, for your friendship, for your dedication, for all the things that are mentioned here, and for all of you and the rest of us. We're honoring Community Renewal International today.
You are?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Sally.
So David asked us to stay 1 minute while he gets something from his.
Yeah.
Okay. And now we're going to have one more for the Facebook.
Okay, what
We'll
is?
just stay right here.
All right.
Okay.
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 All right.
I think we're good.
Good.
I think we're good.
Thanks, Sally.
Welcome, Mack McCarter.
Thank you. Thank you, Sally. Thank you. Thank you, Sally. Aristotle, about 2,300 autumns ago, penned what is still something very, very important to us called his rhetoric, which had to do with public speech. And he talked about the three parts of public speech. One, of course, all of you remember, is the pathos, the participatory need of the audience. And in this group, headed so wonderfully by Sterling Sperrin and all of you who are here, didn't come together. We're not here to come together to make a speech. I know this group. I know all of your hearts, even though I might not have met you, but we've really come together to do more than to make a speech. We've come together to make a difference in this world. And so that's why we're here, and this is an experience I've learned that must be one that we share together in. And when Judy and I moved back to Shreveport, Louisiana, after I was born and reared there and grew up there, and then we moved away where I pastored cowboys out in West Texas for 18 years, returned back home, and we were led to join one of the larger African American congregations there in Shreveport. And so I had the occasion to give my first sermon ever, which I'm not going to repeat today, but my first sermon ever to an African American congregation, and I was wholly unprepared for the high theological moment because it's rightly believed that no person should ever stand by themselves to break open the unsearchable riches of God, that it is a participatory event. It is the epitome of what Aristotle was talking about. I was wholly unprepared for it. As I began to speak, which I'd preached largely to white audiences not largely, forever to white audiences, and folks, you don't understand, white audiences are more boring than the speaker is boring. I mean, what do you mean they? We just sit there and they'll walk out and say, oh boy, what a great sermon. And I'm going, why didn't you inform your face or something, you know? And so here we are. I stand up in an African American church and I begin to speak, wholly unprepared for voices that said, go on with it, talk now. Go with it. And I'm going, there's a voice in the back of my mind that goes, how shocking. But there's another voice that takes over that says, sick 'em, tiger. And they almost didn't get me down from the pulpit. I almost tore that up, walk with it now. And so this antiphonal response was a whole new experience for me. And the old preacher that had put me up there, Papa Joe Martin, put his arm around me and he said, now Mack, listen, if you'll listen to us, we'll help you. And you learn to listen because it's all of us together that make this event happen. And it's bigger than all of us. And I began to do that as I traveled from church to church within the African American community, and I would hear, walk it, preacher. Amen. I know that's right. And I'll tell you, one time I heard this rather plaintive cry by this one woman out there. She said, help him, Jesus. And I knew then that I was way out and I had to get back. And so I'm just telling y'all this to let you know that, of course, the tenor of what I'm about to say is not going to be sermonic. But it is, if you need to say, help him, Jesus, I'm listening, y'all, because this is what we do together. It is. Now, we've come in the midst of a time that has been spoken about and alluded to this morning. And it's the backdrop of where we sit and who we are. And it's a time of vast uncertainty. And it's also a time of fearful probability. And we all know it. And it's bearing in on everything that we do and who we are. There are only two fundamental challenges that the human race is facing. There's a lot of problems. There's a lot of dysfunction. But only two fundamental challenges. The first, of course, is we must take care of our mother planet Earth. If we don't do that, it doesn't matter what programs we run. It doesn't matter what awards are given, what recognition, it matters not. That's fundamental to us. There is no planet B. We don't have an escape pod from this planet. The second fundamental challenge to the human race is this. We as human beings have never in our history grown a society that literally gets better and better and better and better and better, both incrementally and generationally. We have never done it. Lewis Mumford says the chief enigma of history is why do we keep collapsing the societies we construct? And we've done it over and over. And it's an enigma because you would think that the human race would say, wait a minute, we're about to do it again. We've come to a fork in the road and we've got to take the right fork. But we have not even seen the fork. We've just headed like in a lemon-like fashion right off another cliff. And the thing that is bearing in on us today, every one of us, whether we can explicate it or not, is will we collapse? Is this the collapse? The other day, I'm in the habit now of listening to the oldies but goldies, and as a matter of fact, the older I get, the more I go back in time. I'm now in the 50s. I heard the Platters singing that song, Twilight Time. You know, heavenly shades of night are falling, it's twilight time. There might be one or two that remember that song in this room. And I'm thinking, well, if I can eke out another 10 years of life, I'm thinking I might be tapping my toes to something like Rockabye Baby or something. But it is I remember, and I thought to myself, twilight. You know, that's a romantic notion, except when you come to history. And twilight occurs after the sun has already gone down. And twilight could be a description that happened, according to the historian Toynbee, over 28 times to major civilizations. There's twilight and then the darkness. Over and over and over again. And this is the critical question of our day. To hear all of the good that's being done, to hear the lives that are being sacrificed for the good, and yet to know that it appears that we are once again faced with a heavy, heavy burden. I remember and you remember with me in the 1850s when there was a similar time in our nation's history, and Longfellow wrote that incredible poem that was an ache for our society called The Builders. And you remember those lines when he says, "Thou too sail on, O ship of state, sail on, O Union strong and great. Humanity with all its fears, with all the hopes for future years, is hanging breathless on thy fate." What a poignant moment is this. And those lines from Ulysses that Tennyson penned could be they could grace the editorial pages of every newspaper. You remember those lines because they speak of twilight. Listen to the lights begin to twinkle from the rocks. The long day wanes. The slow moon climbs. The deep moans round with many voices. If we're going to break what no generation has ever broken, if we're going to break what no society has ever broken, we must break through this cycle of collapse. Because only until we come together in a society that is sustainably getting better and better and better can we come together on planet Earth to solve the problem of our environment. And unless we all do it together, it will never be done. And so therefore, the first challenge is fundamentally dependent upon us answering the second challenge. We have to break through. And it must be a global community of all human beings, period. End of paragraph. And so here we are. And I think that we're past the need for hope. I think we've gone past it. I think that what we most need now is a tangible, concrete, workable miracle. Period. So I'm glad you responded. The biggest hero that Albert Einstein had was a fellow by the name of James Clerk Maxwell. James Clerk Maxwell in the mid-1800s was the Einstein of his era, smartest man probably walking planet Earth, at least according to Einstein. He was a great Scotsman at the University of Edinburgh, and he, without a computer, did all the mathematical equations necessary to discover the electromagnetic force, which is one of the four great forces holding all of life together. He was a smart fellow. And Einstein had three portraits in his private study. He had the portrait of Sir Isaac Newton and then Michael Faraday, but he had James Clerk Maxwell's portrait there. And James Clerk Maxwell said this: any assessment of history, stay with me, any assessment of history that does not take into account the possibility of miracle is a false assessment of history. I'm going to say it again. Any assessment of history which does not take into account the possibility of miracle is a false assessment of history. Now, Maxwell defined miracle this way. Maxwell said that a miracle is something that takes place, and he said this in his famous essay on singular points, is something that takes place within history. But when it happens, it is so statistically infinitesimally small that no finite mind can grasp its significance. But it changes everything. If we were to look at the process of history and the conditions of history, and then what he called a singular point happened within history, it changed the entire dynamic and transformed the direction and the conditions just unalterably, unbelievably. And he said, any assessment of history that does not take into account those possible singular points, which can be persons and gatherings, is a false assessment of history. So Napoleon is ravaging all of Europe. Who notices when a little baby is born in northern Kentucky in a log cabin? Who notices? And yet Abraham Lincoln comes forward to heal a nation and to set us on another course. And I am saying that we must have a miracle. And it's that kind of miracle that can take place in a life or a gathering of lives. We haven't come today to be together to make a speech. We've come together to make a difference. That's why we're here. And yet, here we are filled with what the ancients called mountain ranges all over the place. We've got obstacles to this miracle, huge obstacles. But one of the things that Clerk Maxwell said is this: He said, the more complex a system, now get this, the more complex a system, the greater the possibility of singular points, the greater the possibility of miracles. Complexity in our society is not our enemy. It is our friend. He said, you're not going to find a lot of singular points in an earthworm. The more complex it is, then the more the possibility of miracle, of singular points. And it could change everything. And so here are these mountains arrayed against us. We have mountains of racism and mountains of hatred and mountains of envy and mountains of greed. Name the mountains. But they're not mountains like the Alleghenies or the Sierra Madres. They're mountains that we made. Mountains of dysfunction, mountains of meanness, mountains all around us. How in the world can we deal with the mountains so that we can realize a miracle? Well, I got to tell you, out of the simplistic life that I live, about 15 years ago, I saw something on TV that gave me not only the idea that miracles are going to happen perhaps today, right here, in one life or in a gathering. And I had tuned into my television to watch a Discovery Channel on dinosaurs. It was coming on at 8 o'clock. I got there 5 minutes too quick. And I was on the Discovery Channel, and the entire screen was filled with ants. Yeah, we're going to go from Maxwell to ants. Was filled with ants. Here's this whole glob of ants, and they were, if ants can be disconcerted, they were terribly disconcerted. They were upset. And then I was just about to channel off that thing and wait for my program on dinosaurs, and just spin about 30 channels real quick like we men can do. And that's when the announcer said something that froze my thumb in midair. And I watched the last 5 minutes of the show. And then I did something I've never done before, since. I took the 1-800 number. I called them. I gave them my rather sacred Visa number and ordered the entire program, of which I'd only seen 5 minutes. I went in and told Judy, I said, I just used our credit card and ordered a video. She said, you did what? She said, what'd you order? And I said, well, it's called The Ultimate Guide to Ants. She said, you did what? And it took about 6 weeks to get there. I died every day. But here's what I saw. Here's what I saw, y'all. The announcer said this: ants have been living in successful societies for millions of years. And I went, well, that beats us. And then I watched what they had done. They had a whole group of ants on a flat surface, and they had ant eggs, and then they had some grains of sand. And those ants were upset because they couldn't get the grains of sand together to make their babies safe. And then they did something astonishing. They had another surface that was separate from this surface, and they had a 1 ant wide straw that went from one surface to the other. And on this surface, they had like a mud, it was shaped like a sea, like a mud sea on this surface. And then I watched one ant make its way across that straw. And with its tentacles, it felt every single millimeter of space and repeated the process. And then that ant did something astonishing. It walked back over the straw. It bodily picked up another ant, and that ant let it. It got on its back. Didn't say, well, do we need to check out, with the NCOC if this is the right thing to do? Didn't do anything like that. It got on its back, and that one ant carried the other ant over, and both repeated exactly the same process. Both go back. Both pick up another ant. Where there were 2, now there are 4. Where there were 4, then there were 8. 8, 16, and so on until some unseen signal went through the entire colony. They stood up, they gathered their ant eggs, they gathered grains of sand, they brought all their ant eggs over and placed them in the sea. They filled it in with grains of sand until there was just a little opening. They knew their babies were safe. There was a palpable relaxation of all the ants together. They kept bumping into each other going, hey, the babies are good, they're looking great, everything. And all those ants, in less than 5 minutes, they literally mobilized and marched the entire colony. And I'm sitting there going, good gracious sakes alive. And here's what I got. A simple act put into a system can solve a sophisticated problem. A simple act put into a system can solve a sophisticated problem. You give enough ants enough time, they'll take down Mount Everest.
Go with it, man.
I'm telling you. They will take down Mount Everest. Now stop and think of what that means to us. We are operating individually. We're operating episodically. But what if we took that which was common to us, which is the capacity to care for everyone, and march together in one generation? If they can do it in 5 minutes, we can do it in one generation, and be the generation to make that happen. All of us doing our work wherever we are, but all of us united together in the common capacity to care for each other and identifying one another, saying, this is a caring person. That's what we have in terms of the We Care team. Now, it's different if you run from Mount Everest to try to take Vesuvius down for ants. It's a volcano. So how do you deal with human hearts that are so mercurial that there's the best in us and the worst in us? How do we do that? It's different than a Mount Everest. And that is probably the greatest challenge that we ever have. Is there a power that could do that? That can literally unleash us from our selfishness, unlock us and bring us and bind us, and then send us forth together, no matter our diversity, no matter, but together in our humanness. Years ago, after the word got out in Shreveport that Judy and I had been led to join an African American church, I had a telephone call from a new friend who was calling about an old friend. He said, I've got a friend, Mack, I need you to talk to. He's got a terrible problem with race. You know, how do we solve these mountains? How do we get rid of the mountains? He said he's got a terrible problem with race, and he needs to talk to you. He said he remembers you, you know, that you broke your leg real bad playing football, and I was thinking to myself, yeah, it ruined what could have been a fantastically mediocre career. And he said he really needs to visit with you. I said, well, Ronnie, who is he? He said his name, and he told me I can use his name. It's Tommy Thigpen. And I said, Ronnie, I don't want to talk to anybody who's a racist. I really don't. And he said, hey, Mack, would you do it for me? And I said, Ronnie, I'll visit with him, but I'd really rather not. And so I grew up as Mackie, and this guy called me. He said, Mackie, I want to visit with you. This is Tommy Thigpen. I said, okay, Tommy, meet me Wednesday over at the Madison Square Garden. And I didn't even remember what he looked like. He was a younger guy. He was 2 years younger. You didn't remember guys younger than you when you were in high school. And so when I saw him, I did remember him, a little guy. And so he comes in, and we start walking in, and we go to sit down. And as we're sitting down, Tommy Thigpen said, I hate, and you know the word he used. And then, sticking out his lip almost, he said, now what are you going to do about it? Well, there's part of me that never got baptized. And it's the Querbees Park part of me. Never went under. And I knew exactly what I wanted. I wanted to slap his face. And I thought, God, how in the world, the worst problem that we can possibly deal with, how does this get solved? And he said, what are you going to do about it? And almost miraculously, the words came out of my mouth. Well, Tommy, tonight at Mount Canaan, we're having a prayer service. It's our Wednesday night prayer service, and I want you to go with me. And you'd have thought a rod had been slipped right up his spine. He jerked straight up and said, what? You want me to go to Mount Canaan? I said, yeah. And the other thing is, I don't want you to tell anybody you're going. Now, you can tell everybody after you go, but not before. I didn't want him going saying, well, I'm going over to Mount Canaan with Mack and McCarter, you know. And I said, and Tommy, like a guy that was holding 5 aces, went, all right, I'll come with you. And he had said, you know, they're making a mess out of our city and this and this and this. And I moved out to the lake to just get away and this and this and this. I said, I'll pick you up tonight at 6:30 at your office. And we're going over to Mount Canaan. So I picked him up, went downtown, picked him up. We drove over. And we walked in, and as we drove over, I told him, I said, now, Tommy, when we go into Mount Canaan, I want you to know that I'm going to hug the men and I'm going to kiss the women, because that's what we do. And they had a nickname for me, the Hugging Fool. So I said, but we do that at Mount Canaan, and I don't want you to embarrass me with my friends. He said, I won't. So we walk in, and as we walk in, people believe that because Tommy was with me, he was safe. And so they hugged me and kissed me, and they hugged Tommy and kissed Tommy. Tommy was ruined before we ever got out of the narthex in the foyer. So we go in and sit down, and Tommy's sitting there like this. And Tommy, out of the, we have what's called the old 100s, like a chant that if you close your eyes, you would think you were back in days gone by. And I was looking straight ahead, and I saw out of the corner of my eye Tommy's elbow going up and down, and I thought, is he laughing? And I turned around to sting him, and I looked, and here were tears coming down under his glasses. And Tommy looked at me with trembling lips, and he said, I feel like I've come home. We have lay people stand up and share on Wednesday nights, and Sharon Latier shared what it felt like every single day to experience rejection in Shreveport, Louisiana, because of the stupid millimeter of epidural covering. How stupid. And you could have thought that God was using a 2x4 on Tommy. And she said, but we rise above it and we forgive and we love. All through the service, Tommy wept. At the end of the service, Harry Blake, our pastor, Dr. Blake, looked out in the audience, about 1,000 and with 2 white faces, and he said, Mack, I see you have a visitor. Now, how he knew that? I don't know. He said, Mack, I see you have a visitor. Would you introduce him? And so I stood up and I said, Pastor, this is Tommy Thigpen. Pastor Blake said, Thigpen? Every Thigpen I know is filthy rich. He said, would you like to give expressions? And Thigpen looked at me and said, what does he mean? I said, Tommy, he wants you to talk. Tommy grabbed the back of the pew in front of us, and I sat down. And then Tommy said this, I came here tonight with hate in my heart, but you have loved me out of it, and I feel like I've come home. And he lowered his head and began to cry. Pastor Blake flew out of the pulpit, down the aisle into our pew, and grabbed Tommy Thigpen. And Tommy Thigpen laid his head on Pastor Blake's shoulder and sobbed and sobbed. It must have been a full 2 minutes, and then Pastor Blake broke and walked back down, and Tommy flew out of the pew and grabbed Pastor Blake again and held on to him and sobbed. By that time I was crying. We were all crying. We were shouting and crying. If we could have thrown hymn books, I'd have thrown hymn books. I've never seen anything so powerful in my life. And I couldn't get Tommy out of the church. He was hugging everybody, talking to everybody. We finally got in the car and we started driving back to his office, and Tommy said, "I'm free, I'm free, I'm free." And he started going with me every Wednesday night. And then Tommy joined Mount Canaan. And then Tommy became the head of the men's program at Mount Canaan. He tried to sing in the choir, but good gosh, we ain't got it, you know. And so here he is. And about a year after that, Tommy said, "Can you meet me again at Madison Square?" And I did. He said, "You remember what I said?" I said, "Something radical has got to be done." And I didn't know that what radical had to be done was me. The power of love can change the volcanic nature of the human heart. That's it. And so here we are. We need a miracle. We've got a lot of mountains, but there is a force that has been given to us that can walk out and change you and me and everybody. You know, twilight, the lights begin to twinkle from the rocks. The long day wanes, the slow moon climbs, the deep moans round with many voices. Breathless, the world, breathless. But go on in Ulysses when he speaks. "Come, my friends, 'tis not too late to make a newer world. Push off, and sitting well in order, smite the sounding furrows, for my purpose holds to sail beyond the sunset and the baths of all the western stars until I die. It may be that some great gulf will wash us down. It may be that we will touch the happy isles and see the great Achilles whom we all knew. Though much is taken, much abides. And though we are not now that strength which in old days moved earth and heaven, that which we are, we are. One equal temper of heroic hearts, made weak by time and fate, but strong in will to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. Today could be a singular point. God bless you all.